while De Quincey may not be crazy about mountains and isn't like the other romantics so caught up in nature, notice he does the same sort of fond association with stuff. His fondness for items like old china. And notice his love in that, and memory and association and old books. This fondness for items, association, and also perspective. That here, as we talk about old china, that second paragraph down, in that world before perspective, a china teacup. In this love of these tiny little teacups with these tiny little figures, and the crazy thing that looks like a woman stepping off a boat, 5 miles over into a field. Notice he's playing with, in the same way that we've seen Blake say, perspective makes all the difference. That as Lamb talks about his and his, in this text, Elia's cousin Bridget. We know that cousin Bridget associates with Lamb's own sister Mary. But as they talk about the past and that nostalgia for the past, that love for and curiosity about perspective, that when Bridget talks about I wish the good old times would come again when we were not quite so rich. Notice as Lamb says at the end, time and health and youth have probably changed the coloring of those memories, but he would definitely, yet could those days return, as he says in that last paragraph, could we go back there? He would love to go back there. I hope you identify a little bit with these images of memory and of dearness. And maybe the sense I can remember. Now I have stacks of books that I haven't read. But back when I was a kid, I can remember when it was the biggest thing that my parents would let me order from Grosset and Dunlap 2 Nancy Drew books at a time, but I had to read those 2 before I could get the next 2, and I had those 2 read within at a pretty well one day. Maybe it would take me 2 days, but then it would take another 2 or 3 weeks for the mail actually to send the new order of books. That waiting for those books and the joy of getting them, or when we were able to go to Somerset or Danville where there was a bookstore and they let me buy $10, once every month or something, and then the budget got to be, I could get $20 worth, and now I've got a stack of books that I am eager to read. This is fun stuff, but it doesn't have, when I do get around to reading it, if I ever get around to everything that's in that box, it's not quite as precious as it was when I just had, the arrival of something like The Secret of the Old Clock. Had that sense that it was more precious because it was fewer and farther between. Maybe the same thing, as I was a kid, it was a big treat to get a hamburger. Now, I was certainly well fed at home, but that you ate out and got a deluxe burger, that was, with a milkshake. That was really something. And now I think, who wants another hamburger? But that sense here, perspective, and the difference that makes, and the nostalgia of memory and the looking back, and how memory, notice that's very similar to what you see Wordsworth contemplating in a text like Tintern Abbey. Okay, on from Lamb. Notice he goes back to that little Chinese waiter holding the umbrella, that we go back to perspective again, even as he finishes that piece. De Quincey, the De Quincey text the romantic sense that even a prostitute, as we think about the romantic age and its sense of equality, its love of the human being, or we saw back with Burns, we're calling a mouse your fellow mortal, or certainly your countryman, and no matter of status, that sense of equality. Here, even in I feel no shame, and that emphasis in that first paragraph about the prostitute, and at no time of my life have I been a person to hold myself polluted by the touch or approach of any creature that wore a human shape. And notice here in that prostitute, Anne, we have a young woman who sacrifices her chance to get away from London, to get away from the not pleasant nature of the kind of life that she's living, that she sacrifices that to save this kid on the streets with her, and getting him, that alcoholic beverage when he needs something to revive him, that she finds him help at her own expense, that the depiction of how heroic, be she a prostitute or whatever, that here is this girl who was willing to give this much of herself to another human being, that that sense of her as noble-minded and heroic, and De Quincey's shedding tears over that. Part of that romantic, every human being is a worthwhile person. As he talks about the pains of opium, like Coleridge, De Quincey, that problem of laudanum, that people are addicted without having any idea that's going to happen to them. And some of this description, notice it's very, very 20th century like in some of its structure, but the images there of the dreams and the opium and there too that sense of perspective and time, that it can seem an eternity and then it can seem a few minutes in these dreams, that some of the description there that he tells about of incidents and the lengths of his nights, those faces and the tyranny of those faces, and some of the weird things in those dreams, or dreaming of people in the history past centuries as though it's occurring at the same time, or those stairs that keep going up, 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 and they're never ending. Some of that sense of, again, just his century and the problem of opium and what those reveries were like, and the changed perspective that creates. Moving on from De Quincey to Byron, let's look especially at the start to Childe Harold, making sure we meet this character before we go on to Manfred and Don Juan. With Childe Harold, Byron is the figure who introduces the idea of the romantic hero, and this romantic bad boy figure, the man who has sinned more. I'm looking in the introduction to Byron, that paragraph about the Byronic hero, about 3 paragraphs in. He is an alien. Now this is by the time we get to Manfred. He is an alien, mysterious and gloomy spirit, superior in his passions and powers to the common run of humanity, whom he regards with disdain. He harbors the torturing memory of an enormous, nameless guilt that drives him toward an inevitable doom, and he exerts an attraction on other characters that is the more compelling because it involves their terror and his obliviousness to ordinary human concerns and values. That's the Byronic hero, and we first meet him in Childe Harold. Now, he's a less mature figure than the one we're going to see in Manfred, but in Childe Harold, this first introduction of a bad boy hero, somebody who's already sinned so much and sees himself as kind of a condemned figure who doesn't, he's so isolated from the rest of mankind, both because of his sin and also because of his incredible capabilities, what he could be, and that his sense that he's above the rest of the herd, as he calls other humans. That's the introduction that, if you know Rochester from, say, Wuthering Heights, or, all the dark figures who are attractive in that throughout, I don't know, things like Harlequin romances and movies, that dark, mysterious, somehow a dreadful past that hangs over and haunts him, and yet separates him from others but makes him super attractive in some way to women. That's our Childe Harold hero. This is the Childe Harold cantos. Those are travel narratives. Young men in Europe would take the European tour. That guys, that sort of your after kind of your graduation trip. That's seeing Europe, seeing the sights. This let readers travel. If any of you're taking Dr. Gower's travel class, this is travel writing. Here's writing and traveling and telling about Europe, but Byron does it through the voice of this young Childe Harold, who has initially named him Childe Buren. How close that is to his, but he is a distinct character from Byron's own self, but one that identifies pretty closely with, say, a public eye of what people thought Byron was like. So as we notice this introduction, we're not reading much of Childe Harold, just this introduction to that Byronic figure that you see in full maturity in Manfred. That sense of sin's long labyrinth. Here's a character, stanza 2, who didn't in virtue's ways, he's bad, but spent his days in riot and, shameless activity, ungodly glee. Few earthly things found favor in his sight, save concubines and carnal company. Here's a kid who already, before he's even really 17 or 18, he's already done it all and is bored to death with it. And yet, what does he do next? Here he's stanza 3, lineage long. He comes from this wonderful background, but stanza 4, he basked him in the noontide sun. He did all these fun, but worse than adversity the child befell. He felt the fullness of satiety. He's done it all. What else is there left for him to do? And he's, not even 20 yet. So what? He hasn't made atonement for any of those sins, stanza 5. But really he loves only one, but that's a forbidden love. And later on, Canto 3, we're going to get the sense probably it's an incestuous kind of love. And she's happy that really he couldn't have her, that sense of, but here he is sick at heart and but he wouldn't want you to see him crying, but there is this sullen tear. And that image that closes out our section from part 1, with pleasure drugged. What do you do next? He's already done it all, and it's too much, and he's too full. What else? He's bored stiff. And even for change of scene, just to have something new, he wouldn't mind going to hell or dying, would seek the shades below. That's our first image of, the bored teen who's already seen too much and done too much. And it's our first literary introduction to him. And Byron will take him on, 4 cantos worth of trips throughout Europe. We'll probably pull this one to a close here.